Hi there, thanks for having me. My name is Laura Santamaria and I am LogDNA's developer advocate, and I'm here today to talk to you about guidelines, guardrails, and human error. Whenever we think about incidences, we typically think about human error. It's probably one of the most common causes that are listed for engineering incidents around the world. And human error can mask a lot of different things happening whenever we see that as a reason. It's shorthand. And we think about, what do we blame when we talk about human error? I know we do blameless postmortems, but really it's talking about, how do we say that we're human and things go wrong and we have accidents, we don't get enough sleep and we make a mistake. Things like that. There's all sorts of different things that fall underneath the human error umbrella. It can be a mistake. It can be someone doesn't know something and they try to do something anyway. It can be, like I said, sheer exhaustion. But the thing to know about human error is that it's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to mess up. We're human. It's just part of life. Whenever you see human error on an incident, though, the thing to keep in mind is that there's probably some failed process that maybe didn't prevent us from having some kind of mistake. There might be some mitigation strategies we could put in place to ensure that any human error that might happen in the future is not the same one. So when we think about human error when it comes to incidences, or if you're thinking about a chaos engineering experiment and there is a mistake and we call that human error, we want to know, how do we make sure that doesn't happen again? So whenever I think about human error on an incident report, I typically think about guidelines and guardrails. And I think of that as a framework for how do we move forward together and ensure that we don't have the same problem happen twice. So what are guidelines and guardrails? Guidelines, let's start there. Guidelines aren't rules. That's one of the things that they're not. They're really more like best practices. They're understanding that, hey, here are all the things that you want to do, or here are the things that make the most sense, as long as they're logical to do so. So sometimes a guideline is something that you take a look at and you decide, you know what? This isn't the most logical choice on my part. Let me go do something different. So that's just a small little thing that you need to keep in mind when you think about guidelines. Now, what are some examples of guidelines? Well, the first one is probably how-to guides. So any kind of guide is a guideline. Little small reminder there. So you can think about any kind of how-to guide. Processes. Which playbooks do you run? How do you decide what to do next? Processes are another kind of guideline. And then finally, we talk about shared experiences. And that might be where you get someone more experienced to come and tell you, so when I ran this playbook, here's what I saw. Here are some of the things that you'll probably hit along the way. Maybe they might realize, you know, you're seeing something different than I am. Let's go figure out how to change that together. That is a guideline. And it might not be too traditional of a guideline, but it's there. Now, on top of guidelines, we have guardrails. Now, guardrails are different. Guardrails keep you running along the same path even if something goes wrong. They prevent you from ending up in the danger zone so that you're sure that you're going to keep going where you need to go, even if a mistake happens. So let's talk about some examples. The most common one is automation. So any kind of CI/CD pipeline, gated access to production, things like that, that's all automation. Those are all guardrails, trying to help us avoid making a mistake so that we're not crafting things by hand and building it all out ourselves. Another one is an alert. So let's say that you're running some automation and your guardrails are running and you're off and doing, and maybe you're following the next guide in your guidebook. And something suddenly doesn't seem right. An automated alert pops up and says, hey, this doesn't look right. Let's go fix that. That's another guardrail. That's something that says there might be something wrong. Now, the final one might get people a little bit not sure that this is really a guardrail, but it is, trust me. And that guardrail is verification. Now, it can be manual verification, like a code review. A code review is really a guardrail. It's other people double checking and making sure that you're not making a mistake. So it's one way to just add a really simple guardrail if you don't really have the time or availability to do automation. Another verification you probably see every day. That little pop-up when you're clicking around in a UI or touching on your phone and you see something say, "Are you sure you want to do that?" And you can click OK or cancel. Or even just in your terminal, do you want to install this? Type Y or N. That's verification. That's a guardrail. That's making sure that you're doing the thing you expected to do. It's one way to make sure that if you are, let's say, a little tired, that you're doing the thing you expect to do. So, with all of these in place, the thing about guidelines and guardrails is that they really are the most effective when you deploy them early. So, let's say that you have a system. If those guidelines and guardrails are in place, that system will continue to stay on the rails because you have a way to prevent human error from happening. But the thing about this is that there is a failure mode when you think about guidelines and guardrails. Now let's back up and explain why and why that early deployment is so important. Let's pretend you're a business and your business is starting to thrive. You're getting your first customers and you are just so excited. And you start deploying things because you have a customer coming on in 2 hours and everything starts going and you just try to get moving, and something goes wrong. Well, sometimes that happens because we as human beings, in our worry about an incident or something going on, we rush to respond. So we have this habit. We want to make things right. We want to do things well. And so we really try to get something done. Now, there's a problem with rushing to respond. And typically that means that guidelines might not be that great, and so they get ignored. Oh, I'll look at the guidebook later. I know what I'm doing. I'm in a hurry. Or guardrails are too brittle. You don't have automation in place. The alerts aren't loud enough. No one's doing code review. All of those things can happen when we're in a rush to make it work. And this is why it's so important to deploy early. Because really, guidelines and guardrails are just like a habit. You need to keep using them and keep making sure that they happen to ensure that habit stays in place. So how do you ensure that any habit stays? And how do you ensure your guidelines and your guardrails are used and help prevent human error? Well, the first thing is establish them early. Deploy them when you don't need them so that you can be sure they're done right. Then be consistent in using them. You want to make sure that even if you think you know the process, just double check. Even if you think that you have a good code, make sure somebody does some code review. Double check your alerts. Watch your automation. Be consistent in using it. And then maintain everything. If something's not exactly going right, you need to say, okay, I need to update my guidelines. Oh, my guardrails aren't strong enough yet. Let me go spend some time on them. Really, you can trust guidelines and guardrails if they're set up properly. You need to make sure that they're established just like any habit, that you are consistent with them and that you maintain them. Even though they're there, though, there is one thing to remember. We are still human, even if we create guidelines and guardrails for ourselves. So sometimes mistakes happen. Human error does happen. Let's make sure that the same ones don't happen over and over again. Thanks so much. Bye.